Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. I'm Will Robinson Smith. Will be providing our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We are broadcasting from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Hope you all have had a wonderful and productive work or school week. We're excited for the weekend and to kick it off with the latest Falcon 9 flight from Space Launch Complex 4 East, or Slick 4E, over at Vandenberg. Our Stephen Young is running the technical operations of this broadcast. Our launch photographers, Adam Bernstein, Michael Kane, have this morning off, given this isn't a West Coast launch. But they'll be back in action before you know it. We are in a bit of a quiet period here on the Space Coast, as both of the pads are now in preparation for two NASA missions. Over on Launch Complex 39A, SpaceX is turning the pad over from a Falcon 9 to a Falcon Heavy configuration now that the Polaris Dawn mission has launched and those astronauts have returned. They're preparing for a Falcon Heavy flight of NASA's Europa Clipper mission, set to launch no earlier than October 10th. Meanwhile, over on Space Launch Complex 40, or Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, they're preparing for the Crew 9 mission, the flight of NASA astronaut Nick Hague and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. Alexander set to make his first trip to space, Nick returning to space, but becoming the first Space Force Guardian to launch to space. That mission looking to lift off no earlier than Thursday, September 26th. So we're looking forward to the arrival of these two gentlemen here at the Cape. That's coming up on Saturday afternoon. So be sure to stick with Spaceflight Now for upcoming coverage on that, as well as their forthcoming mission. But for now, our eyes over on Vandenberg, which, looking at a pretty close to sunrise launch. However, taking a look at some satellite pictures here from GOES West, you can see there's quite a bit of cloud in the area, so it may not be the most picturesque launch that we've ever seen, but if you happen to be in the area of the pad or somewhere in the central to Southern California area or over in the Southwest United States, and you do happen to catch the Falcon 9 as it makes its ascent, we'd love to see your photos or video. So be sure to tag Spaceflight Now on social media. Certainly appreciate the more than 1,000 of you that are joining with us live this morning. I know it's a bit early for folks on the West Coast. Coming up on 9:30 here on the East Coast. SpaceX is targeting the opening of the window here at 6:50 a.m. Pacific, 9:50 a.m. Eastern, 13:50 UTC for this Falcon 9 launch. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it, as our moderator, Christy Lee, is kindly reminding to please hit the like button. It allows more folks to find this live coverage, and we'd certainly appreciate it. Also want to welcome aboard Aussie Space Girl, joining us, one of our other wonderful moderators. You know, it's starting to get late down in Australia, so appreciate you hanging out with us. We'll keep our eyes out for Astro Jen and Astro Joe and Rusty Shackelford. If they do pop into the live chat, be sure to give them a good morning. We are also powered by a wonderful channel member community here on YouTube, so thanks to folks like Patty Chichil, Grandpa Jim Pondu, and many others. Quiet morning for channel members, but looking forward to seeing a few more folks pop in. I see Glenn A joining us now, Zeus's mommy, Stinky. Hello to you all. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to member-only videos here on YouTube, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch moments from the Cape in 4K. Speaking of channel member videos, we did just post one earlier this week. It was the full conversation that we had out at Launch Complex 39B. That's the pad where they're currently continuing testing on the Mobile Launcher 1, which previously supported the launch of the Artemis 1 mission. It's getting outfitted and checked out ahead of the first crewed flight of the Space Launch System rocket. That's Artemis 2, set to launch no earlier than September of 2025, pending readiness of that mission. Of course, one of the long poles in the tent on that one is the analysis of the Orion heat shield from the Artemis 1 mission, which is still being studied by NASA. No decision has been made yet or publicly announced as far as whether they are comfortable flying the heat shield for Artemis 2 as is, or if they need to go in and make some modifications, which would likely push the Artemis 2 mission back by some number of months, if not longer. So you can catch the full conversation we had about what's going on with the mobile launcher. Again, that's up on the channel right now. And I want to thank Callistia Lee for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Appreciate that, Callistia. And for being a member now for a full year, saying, time sure does fly when you're having fun. Thanks to all of Spaceflight Now for making the past year fantastic. And to all those who are with us and making today fantastic, we're glad to have you on board this morning. Last but not least, if you have a comment or question about this launch or other space activities and your comment or question is appropriate to be on the show, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. You could do so by using the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will he be giving us some interesting things to talk about with this flight, but you'll also be supporting what we do here on the channel, and that, as always, greatly appreciated. As we are continuing the countdown here, you see we've got 21 minutes, 36 seconds on the countdown clock. Let's talk about what's ahead for this Falcon flight and the milestones that have passed and those that are still ahead of us as we look towards the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 9-17 mission. Back at T-minus 38 minutes is when the SpaceX launch director made the call to go ahead with the start of propellant load. With that go-ahead given, fueling started at T-minus 35 minutes with the loading of RP-1, or rocket-grade kerosene, on both the first and the second stages of the Falcon 9. At the same time, liquid oxygen began flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 30 minutes, they started loading cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels for the Falcon 9's first stage. Helium is used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Same comes up about 5 minutes later on the second stage. About 3 or so minutes ago, the second stage kerosene tank topped off. T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when the strong back chill down process begins. That's when they begin to thermally condition those feed lines prior to second stage liquid oxygen load, which begins at T-minus 16 minutes. We know that, of course, visually by the so-called big vent. That comes up at about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. Moving on to the T-minus 7-minute point, that's when the chill down of the 9 Merlin 1D engines gets underway. It involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. It helps protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank is full. And at T-minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back retract sequence begins. Here at Vandenberg, the clamp arms underneath the payload fairings open up, and then the transporter erector, or the strong back, reclines about 13 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket, and it stays in that position until liftoff. About 3 minutes before that point, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. A minute after that, same is true on the second stage, at which point the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. Both of those events are wrapped up in the single call-out, with the Falcon 9 being in startup. T-minus 45 seconds out is when the SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch if everything is continuing on track. 3 seconds before liftoff, the engine ignition command is issued, and if all 9 Merlin 1D engines are healthy and ignite, hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 for a T0 liftoff coming up in T-minus 18 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. We're at the start of this launch window today, 6:50 a.m. Pacific, 9:50 a.m. Eastern, 13:50 UTC for our friends around the world. Now T-minus 17 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. This mission's set to be the 91st Falcon 9 rocket to launch so far this year. This will be SpaceX's 92nd overall orbital launch, including the Falcon Heavy flight that happened back on June 25th, sending up the GOES-U satellite. Let's talk a little bit about where this Falcon 9 is going to fly once it does leave the pad. Of course, taking off from Space Launch Complex 4 East here at Vandenberg. Taking a look at a satellite view here from the pad. This batch of 20 Starlinks heading up to the 9th shell of the constellation. So this Falcon 9 will fly in a southeasterly trajectory along the coast of California and Mexico. The orange arc represents the trajectory of the first stage with the booster set to land on the drone ship. Of course, I Still Love You. It's coming up about a little more than 8 minutes after liftoff is when that landing should take place. The booster supporting this mission is making its 13th launch and 13th landing attempt today. Talk a little bit about its booster history in just a few minutes. SpaceX also will endeavor to recover the payload fairings as well, as they save about $6 million per recovery effort. So it's an important part of their business model. Also, they're working to certify their boosters and their payload fairings for up to 40 flights each. And so they will try to recover as many of them as possible, refurbish them, and turn them around for future flights. They splash down in the waters of the Pacific Ocean, in this case, under the support of parachutes, which you see in that image from SpaceX from a presentation earlier this year. And they're then brought back to their respective ports with one of their recovery vessels. Now T-minus 15 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. We're about 20 seconds into second stage LOX load. On board this Falcon flight are a total of 20 Starlink V2 Mini satellites. Among those are 13 that feature the direct-to-cell capability. SpaceX continues to build out this part of their constellation. With this mission, they will have launched a total of 220 of these DTC Starlinks so far. Today's mission marks the 63rd dedicated Starlink launch in 2024 and the 126th time that SpaceX has launched the V2 Mini variety of Starlinks. Of course, the version 3 will launch on board Starship once that does begin to deliver payloads to orbit. For now, these Starlinks weigh about 1,760 pounds or about 800 kilograms. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. Unlike the previous versions of Starlink that use Krypton Hall thrusters, these Starlinks use Argon Hall thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering. These satellites are built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle. And once they're deployed, they will be deployed at about 180 miles or 290 kilometers in altitude at a 53-degree inclination. If you've been with us for previous Starlink launches, you know that we like to show you what a Starlink looks like in an on-orbit configuration, and we've been previously relying on a somewhat darker uh, picture of Starlink from HEO, which captured that image of Starlink V2 Mini back last year. Well, they're out with a new image that they just published yesterday. So here is a color image partnership between Black Sky and HEO. Bring you what a Starlink V2 Mini looks like in an on-orbit configuration in full color. It's a busy time for SpaceX, of course. They are not only preparing for this launch in 12 minutes, 45 seconds, as well as preparing to launch a crew mission for the first time from Slick 40 and their latest Falcon Heavy launch from Pad 39A. But over at Starbase, you can see things are also continuing to move along as they're awaiting FAA approval for the launch of Flight 5. Taking a look here at the Super Heavy booster, which will support Flight 5. Big mission for SpaceX, as this is the first time that they're hoping to catch this booster you see here live on your screen. And so they are continuing to do some checkouts, as they have been for the last couple of months, of the, as they call it, the Mechazilla. It's of course, the tower that you see there just to the right of the Super Heavy booster. So we'll continue to keep an eye on happenings down at Starbase throughout the day. If you'd like to go ahead and keep your eyes on activity down there, as well as the pads around Florida, you can always check in on the comings and goings on our 24-hour channel here on YouTube. It's called Launchpad Live. Be sure to give that a like as well if you haven't already. Allow more people to find that as they go about their curiosity with happenings at the launch pads. Now T minus 11 minutes and counting. Just about 4 minutes away from the chill down of the 9 Merlin 1D engines. Preparation for launch. Taking a look at the live chat, want to thank the more than 3,400 of you that are now joining with us live here on this particular stream. If you haven't already, we'd also appreciate it if you could hit the like button over here as well to allow some more folks to find their way into our live launch coverage. Certainly appreciate it. As we were just mentioning, SpaceX is preparing to launch these two gentlemen to space in about a week, a little less than a week now. To the left is Nick Hague and Space Force Guardian, preparing to launch, was the former pilot of the mission, now serving as the commander of the Crew 9 flight. To his left, our right in this image, is Alexander Gorbanov, a cosmonaut from Roscosmos, who is preparing to head up to space for the very first time. If you recall, the Crew 9 mission looked a little bit different just a few months ago. This was the makeup of the crew as they were visiting Hangar X, the site where SpaceX refurbishes the Falcon boosters in preparation for future flights. This is here in Florida. It's not the booster that the Crew 9 mission will take to space. That, of course, booster B1067. You can see that tail number there on the far left-hand, upper left-hand corner of this picture here. Unfortunately for Xena Cardman and Stephanie Wilson, Xena on the left, Stephanie on the right, the Boeing Starliner was brought back without its crew, Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, meaning that the SpaceX Dragon Freedom, which will bring Nick and Alex up to the International Space Station, will remain uh, open for 2 seats to allow Butch and Sunny to have a ride home from the space station coming up around the February 2025 timeframe. Both Xena and Stephanie are eligible to be reassigned to future missions. At this point, NASA has not publicly announced when they plan to fly them next and what that schedule may look like. They did announce the crew for the Crew 11 mission, excuse me, for the Crew 10 mission, and neither of them were assigned to it. So we'll have to look to Crew 11 and beyond potentially for these two NASA astronauts to fly to space. Stephanie looking to make a return trip to space. Xena was going to be making her first trip to space as a member of the 2017 astronaut class known as the Turtles. And unfortunately, because of how this is all shaking out, with the upcoming departure of Crew 8 and before Crew 9, or before Crew 10, I should say, arrives on orbit, this will bring about the end of the so-called turtle takeover, as NASA astronaut Rajachari of the Crew 3 mission termed it. And the continuous presence of turtles on orbit will, unfortunately for that class, come to an end. Now T minus 6 minutes, 58 seconds and counting. The chill down of the 9 Merlin 1D engines is now getting underway out at Slick 40. Let's go ahead and talk about the launch timeline for this mission. Once the booster leaves the pad, here's a sequence of events that we're expecting in a nominal flight. About 1 minute, 9 seconds after liftoff, the rocket will pass through max Q, or the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. That'll be followed by a few events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff at T plus 2 minutes and 29 seconds, followed 3 seconds later by stage separation, and then the ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage, T plus 2 minutes and 39 seconds. Shortly after the 3-minute mark, the payload fairings will be jettisoned, again splashing down in the waters of the Pacific Ocean under parachutes. A few minutes later, the first stage entry burn will begin. That burn of 3 of the Merlin engines on the first stage, lasting just 23 seconds in total. The landing burn will begin at T plus 7 minutes 52 seconds, setting the booster B-1075 up for a touchdown on the drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, coming up at T plus 8 minutes and 18 seconds. Merlin vacuum engine will cease firing on its first burn. T plus 8 minutes 47 seconds. We'll enter into a coast phase until T plus 53 minutes 42 seconds. There will be a brief 1-second burn, setting up the Starlink satellites to be deployed. T plus 1 hour and 35 seconds. We are coming up on our views of the Falcon 9 rocket here momentarily, so let's quickly step through the booster history here. It's got 12 missions under its belt so far, so let's run down the dozen before we make it a baker's dozen today. And actually, we'll talk about this in the background because we do now have views of the Falcon 9 rocket here. The pre-sunrise hours at Vandenberg Space Force Base. You can see, as we were talking about, bit cloudy, bit foggy, very much a Vandenberg type morning.
Strong back retract has started.
Here, the call for a strong back retract beginning. Maybe a little hard to see, but the clamp arms will soon be opening up underneath the payload fairings and the transporter erector, which you can actually see not too bad in this shot. They'll pull back about 13 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. In the remaining minutes, we have just a quick rundown of this booster's history. It first launched back on January 19th of 2023 on a Starlink mission, Starlink 2-4. In total, it's launched 9 Starlink missions, a mission for the Space Development Agency called SDA-OA or 0A. It launched the second mission for the Sarah constellation, Sarah 2, as well as the rideshare flight called Transporter 11, which was the most recent launch of this booster back on August 16th of this year.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
Good call on stage 1 LOX load. We are now awaiting the conclusion of fueling coming up here in just about 45 seconds. If you'd like a more thorough overview of the booster history, take a look at that here. Appreciate Stephen shuffling things around, making this possible to show this view. Now just about 2.5 minutes away from liftoff so far. Everything at this point moving along smoothly with the countdown. No issues to report.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
Good call up from SpaceX.
Ground gas,
At this
close out.
point, Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. You know, the call for ground gas closeouts as well. Yeah, a little hard to see this morning, but might be able to tell there's a little bit of, oh, there we go. That's a better vantage point. Clearing the feed lines prior to liftoff in now just about a minute.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
At this point now, we're just waiting for the SpaceX launch director to give their go for launch in about 5 seconds.
Go for launch.
And with that, this Falcon is ready to fly. Just a little less than 40 seconds to go. Let's go ahead and listen into the final count from SpaceX, and we'll be back with more commentary on the other side of liftoff.
T minus 30 seconds. T minus 15 seconds. T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. And liftoff. Very confident, very confident.
Vehicles pitching downrange.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
Nominal power and telemetry.
And a good liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket, if not Perhaps maybe the most picturesque liftoff we've seen from Vandenberg so far this year, but a good beginning
Supersonic.
to this mission. Is the Falcon 9 now traveling faster than the speed of sound, approaching max Q.
Max Q.
Falcon 9 pushing through the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. We're coming up on a few different events in fairly rapid succession. You'll hear the call for thermally conditioning the Merlin vacuum engine being in chill down. Coming up next, though, there you see that call, or hear that call. Coming up on a few different events in fairly rapid succession here. Again, we'll come up on first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, T plus 2 minutes, 29 seconds into flight. That'll be followed by stage separation a few seconds after that. And then the ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine, T plus 2 minutes, 39 seconds. Finally, we'll see the payload fairings deploy just after the 3-minute mark.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
Good string of callouts from SpaceX. You could see the hypersonic grid fins now deploying on the Falcon 9's first stage. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for that booster. So it'll begin to make its way down towards the drone ship. Of course, I still love you. The next several minutes. Good fairing separation. Now a little more than three and a half. A little more than 3.5 minutes into this flight so far. All appears to be going quite smoothly for SpaceX at this point. Coming up in just a little more than 2 minutes from now will be the start of the entry burn. Take a look at the telemetry data for the booster at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. You can see it's approaching apogee, or the highest point in this arc. May have already crested to that now. About 110 kilometers in altitude. Once that entry burn begins, you'll see that speedometer number drop quite dramatically as the Falcon 9 begins to hit the brakes, making its way back down towards the drone ship. Taking a look up inside the Falcon 9's inner stage here. Now a little more than 5 minutes into flight. A little less than a minute now until the beginning of the entry burn. So far appears to be a nominal burn of the second stage engine as well. SpaceX toggles between the two views on the upper stage to allow continuous observation of that engine bell, giving engineers constant eyes on this rocket, making sure there's no anomalies on the upper stage. Coming up on that entry burn in just a few seconds.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Good call there, and you see the burn underway. 3 Merlins have ignited. This burn will last about 23 seconds in total.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
Good call, good entry burn. Coming up on the landing burn now. That'll begin at about T plus 7 minutes and 52 seconds.
Stage 1 FTS is safe.
That call from SpaceX referring to the flight termination system on the first stage booster, B1075, no longer needed for this stage in flight.
Stage 1 transonic.
Booster now traveling below the speed of sound, looking for its 13th landing to date.
Stage 2 FTS is safe.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Stage 2 terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And for a 13th time, B1075 is safely down on the drone ship.
And back shutdown.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And with those good callouts from SpaceX regarding the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket, that part of the vehicle is entered into a parking orbit where it will coast until T plus 53 minutes 42 seconds. There will be a brief 1-second burn to help circularize the orbit. And then the 20 Starlink satellites, including 13 with direct-to-cell capability, will be deployed at T plus 1 hour and 35 seconds. So a good start to what is going to be a busy weekend for SpaceX now that this Falcon 9 rocket is off the pad and well into its mission. Of course, another part of the company working separately ahead towards the Crew 9 launch and the arrival of NASA astronaut Nick Hague and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. Again, they're touching down at the Space Florida Launch and Landing Facility, formerly the Shuttle Landing Facility. That's coming up tomorrow afternoon. Spaceflight Now, of course, will be out there to greet those two and talk to them about their forthcoming missions. So be sure to keep your eyes on this channel for upcoming coverage of the arrival of these Crew 9 members. And of course, upcoming coverage of the flight as well. Right now, in fact, for channel members, you have discount at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com, where you can find the embroidered Crew 9 mission patch over there on the shop right now. I believe, and Stephen, hop in my ear if I misremembering, but I believe we still have some of the original Crew 9 patches with all 4 of the original astronauts and cosmonaut on there as well. So feel like a little piece of what is essentially Elseworld memorabilia, what if scenario now at this point for Crew 9. You can hop on over and find that patch. Speaking of channel members, want to welcome aboard Mad Scientist, great handle for this channel member community, joining us at the mission specialist level. Appreciate you hopping aboard, Mad Scientist. Glad to have you with us. And with the successful landing of the first stage booster and a good start to this mission, let's go ahead and turn to our mission stats as they currently stand. Now that we've seen the 13th launch and landing of booster B1075, this was also the 376th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 91st Falcon 9 launch of 2024. This was the 319th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was SpaceX's 92nd orbital launch of the year, including, of course, the Falcon Heavy launching the GOES-U satellite back in June. This was the 122nd SpaceX orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 91st orbital launch for SpaceX from Slick 4E, and the 159th overall orbital launch from that pad as well. Moving on to some recovery stats, this landing marks the 202nd booster landing for the drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, the 275th overall drone ship landing, and the 350th Falcon booster landing for SpaceX. Finally, with some industry stats from around the world, this was the 32nd orbital launch from California, the 98th orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 107th orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company, although we're looking for that stat to be changed in just now less than 12 hours from now, as the Rocket Lab has resolved their ground systems issue and is looking to launch another mission for the French Internet of Things company called Kinéis. Second out of 5 booked flights for that company, set to lift off just after 7 p.m. Eastern, 2300 UTC for our friends around the world. That mission launching from New Zealand and Rocket Lab's launch complex in Mahia. Meanwhile, Starlink 9-17 marks the 173rd orbital launch from around the world. There's a launch from China earlier this morning. So now here's where the pie chart currently stands. Got 107 missions for the US, representing 62% of the pie. China with their 42, marking 24%. Russia with 11 launches. Japan in the 4th spot with 4. India and Iran are tied with 3 launches apiece. European Space Agency with 2, and North Korea with 1. And as we go ahead and bid you adieu for now, we'll leave you with one last look of the Super Heavy booster for SpaceX's Starship. Again, if you'd like to continue tracking views of what's going down at Starbase, you can find them over on our 24-hour live channel, that is Launchpad Live. This view coming courtesy of our friends at Lab Padre. Of course, keep it right here at Spaceflight Now as we continue to track the progress towards Flight 5, and the ongoing back and forth between SpaceX and the FAA has certainly been an interesting saga to watch. The FAA is saying that approval for Starship Flight 5 coming likely no earlier than November. So, of course, we'll keep you updated when that does materialize, and you can bet your bottom dollar that Spaceflight Now will be down at Starbase for this launch as SpaceX is looking to catch this super heavy booster. In the meantime, there's plenty to keep us occupied here in Florida, as well as in California at Vandenberg between now and then. Of course, the aforementioned Crew 9 launch coming up next week. There is also the the Falcon Heavy launch of the Europa Clipper mission that is coming up next month. We're also looking forward to the launch of the next planetary defense mission, the sequel, if you will, to NASA's DART. This is ESA's Hera, which is going to be looking at the impact, literally and figuratively, that DART had when it made its impact into the asteroid Dimorphos back a couple years ago. So look for our live coverage on that. Of course, we're also tracking the upcoming second launch of United Launch Alliance's Vulcan rocket, set for no earlier than October 4th. And then, of course, the debut launch of Blue Origin's New Glenn, set for some time in November. So lots to track, lots to keep us busy, and we hope you stick along with us for the ride. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Spaceflight Now for all the action, and take it on over to spaceflightnow.com and bookmark our launch schedule to keep tabs on all of what's coming up before it goes up. I want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast today. Again, our launch photography team of Adam and Michael will be back in action very soon for upcoming happenings here on the Space Coast. I want to thank our moderators, Callistia Lee and Aussie Space Girl, for helping us out today. And most of all, I want to thank you for wherever you're watching from. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and hope it's relaxing, productive, rejuvenating, all the good things. And that'll do it for us here today. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. And folks, we will see you next time. And until then, bye-bye.